The gavel didn't just sound like wood striking wood. For hundreds of innocent people in Cook County, it sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. Judge Elena Vance believed she was untouchable, a god in robes who turned her courtroom into a personal kingdom of bias and corruption. She looked at Marcus Thorne and saw exactly what she wanted to see. Another statistic, another thug to be processed for profit. She mocked him. She violated his rights. She laughed in his face. But Judge Vance made one fatal calculation error. She didn't know that the man standing in handcuffs wasn't a criminal. He was the FBI special agent in charge of the task force investigating her. And he was recording every single word. The air in the holding cell of the 14th District Precinct smelled of stale urine, industrial bleach, and fear. It was a cocktail Marcus Thorne had smelled 1,000 times before, but usually he was the one standing on the other side of the bars, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars and a badge that opened any door in Chicago. Today, Marcus wore a faded grey hoodie, grease-stained jeans, and a pair of scuffed Timberlands. He sat on the cold steel bench, his head bowed, hands clasped loosely between his knees. To the casual observer, he looked like a man defeated by the system. To the officers passing by the cell, he was just booking number 49 Nunolo 1, a 34-year-old black male brought in for aggravated assault on a police officer and resisting arrest. But inside Marcus's mind, the gears were turning with the precision of a Swiss watch. He wasn't defeated. He was hunting. "Hey, new guy," a voice rasped from the corner. Marcus looked up slowly. The speaker was a skinny kid, maybe 19, with a bruised jaw and terrified eyes trying to look hard. "What?" Marcus grunted, keeping his voice low and gravelly. "You got Vance?" the kid asked. "Judge Vance. If you're in the 14th on a Thursday, you got Vance." Marcus nodded once. "Yeah, that's what the paper said. Elena Vance." The kid shook his head, spitting a wad of phlegm onto the floor. "You're cooked, man. Done. She don't listen to nothing. My cousin got 2 years for possession of a joint because he rolled his eyes at her. She's the butcher. If you got a public defender, just plead out. Take the L." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't tell the kid that the butcher was exactly why he was here. He couldn't explain that for the last 8 months, the Chicago FBI field office had been tracking a massive kickback scheme involving private detention centers in the Midwest. The premise was sickeningly simple. Judges were funneling defendants, specifically young men of color, into maximum security private facilities for minor infractions. In exchange, the judges received consulting fees through shell corporations. The head of the snake, according to every informant Marcus had squeezed, was Judge Elena Vance. But they needed more than a paper trail. They needed behavior. They needed her to violate a defendant's constitutional rights on the record with no provocation to prove that her sentencing was predatory, not judicial. They needed a victim. Marcus had volunteered to be the bait. The incident that brought him here had been carefully choreographed. Officer Derek Miller, a dirty cop on Vance's payroll and currently under heavy surveillance, had pulled Marcus over for a broken tail light that was perfectly functional. Marcus had role-played the part perfectly, polite but firm, asking for the reason for the stop. Miller had escalated it, just as the profile predicted. He'd yanked Marcus out of the car, slammed him against the hood, and planted a baggie of methamphetamine in his pocket. It was sloppy police work. It was arrogant, and it was exactly what Marcus needed. The steel door at the end of the hallway clanged open. A heavy-set bailiff with a keychain that sounded like a wind chime walked down the row. "King!" the bailiff shouted, reading off a clipboard. "Marcus King, let's go. It's showtime." Marcus stood up slowly. He adjusted his hoodie. He felt the weight of the hidden micro-recorder tapped to the inside of his thigh, and the second, smaller device sewn into the collar of his hoodie. "Good luck, OG," the kid in the corner whispered. "Keep your head up," Marcus replied. He walked to the bars, turned around, and let the bailiff cuff him. As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, Marcus Thorne disappeared completely. Marcus King was ready to face the butcher. Courtroom 4B was less a hall of justice and more a factory floor. The wood paneling was dated, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing hum, and the gallery was packed with weeping mothers, bored clerks, and lawyers who looked like they hadn't slept in a week. High above it all, sitting on a bench that seemed intentionally elevated 2 feet higher than standard regulation, sat Judge Elena Vance. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with hair sprayed into a blonde helmet that didn't move when she turned her head. She wore rimless glasses that she constantly peered over, looking down her nose at the humanity shuffling before her. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a PTA president or a high-end realtor. But her voice was pure venom. "Mr. Henderson," she was saying to a terrified man in an orange jumpsuit. "I don't care about your job at the warehouse. If you wanted to keep your job, you shouldn't have been loitering in a school zone. Your Honor, I was waiting for my daughter." "Silence!" Vance slammed her hand down. She didn't use the gavel. She used her palm, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "I am setting bail at $50,000. Next." The gallery gasped. $50,000 for loitering. It was a ransom, not bail. Marcus watched from the prisoner's box, studying her. She was fast. Too fast. She wasn't reading the files. She was skimming the summary and making snap judgments based on the defendant's face. She checked her watch constantly. Marcus knew why. She had a lunch reservation at Le Monde at 1:00 p.m. with a consultant from the Crestview Correctional Group. The FBI surveillance team was already at the restaurant, wired up as waiters. But Marcus had to keep her here long enough to bury herself. "State of Illinois versus Marcus King," the clerk droned. "Docket number 77B. Charges: aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, possession of a controlled substance." The prosecutor, a young man named Sterling, who looked like he was fresh out of law school and desperate to please the judge, stood up. "Ready for the people, Your Honor." A frazzled woman in a rumpled suit rushed up to the defense table. This was Sheila O'Reilly, the public defender. Marcus had met her for exactly 3 minutes in the hallway. She was good-hearted, but drowning in a caseload of 300 clients. "Ready for the defense, Your Honor," O'Reilly said, shuffling papers. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a dismissal based on lack of probable cause. The police report states." Judge Vance didn't even look up from her paperwork. "Denied." "But, Your Honor," O'Reilly pressed, "you haven't heard the motion. The officer's dash cam was supposedly malfunctioning, and my client has no prior criminal record in this state. The stop was for a tail light that is clearly working in the impound photos." Vance slowly took off her glasses. She looked at O'Reilly with a mixture of pity and annoyance, then shifted her gaze to Marcus. For the first time, their eyes met. Marcus kept his face neutral, but he held her gaze. He didn't look down. In Vance's courtroom, maintaining eye contact was an act of aggression. "Ms. O'Reilly," Vance said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "we all know how malfunctions happen. But I have a sworn affidavit from a decorated officer, Officer Miller, stating that this man," she gestured vaguely at Marcus with a manicured hand, "attacked him. Look at him. He's the size of a linebacker. Are you telling me Officer Miller, who is 5'9", decided to pick a fight with him?" "Appearance is not evidence, Your Honor," O'Reilly said firmly. In my courtroom, experience is evidence, Vance snapped. I've been on this bench for 15 years. I know a danger to the community when I see one. She turned her body fully toward Marcus. Mr. King, you're new to my city. Marcus leaned into the microphone. I've lived in Chicago for 10 years, Your Honor. Is that so? And what do you do for a living? The report says, unemployed. I'm a consultant, Marcus said. It wasn't a lie. Vance laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. A consultant, right, and I'm the Queen of England. Let me guess, you consult on street pharmaceuticals. The court reporter hesitated, looking at the judge. This was highly improper. Judges weren't supposed to mock defendants. I consult on security matters, Marcus said, his voice steady. And I would like to state for the record that I never touched Officer Miller. He attacked me. You speak when I tell you to speak, Vance roared, her face flushing pink. You see that attitude, Ms. O'Reilly? That is the attitude of a man who has no respect for the law. A man who thinks he can bully his way through life. Vance shuffled the papers. Prosecution? What are you asking for? Sterling, the prosecutor, stood up. Given the assault on an officer, the people request bail be denied, or set at $100,000. O'Reilly audibly gasped. Your Honor, that is absurd. He has no flight risk history. Mr. King, Vance cut in, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You have the look of someone who runs, someone who doesn't like to face consequences. I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to teach you some discipline. She leaned over the bench. Bail is set at $200,000, cash only, and I'm remanding you to the Crestview detention facility until trial. Crestview. There it was, the private prison she had a stake in. Usually, pre-trial detainees went to county. Sending him to Crestview, a facility 2 hours away, known for its harsh conditions and high per diem billing to the state, was the smoking gun. Your Honor, Crestview? O'Reilly stammered. That's for high-risk felons. This is a preliminary hearing. He attacked a cop, Miss O'Reilly. In my book, that makes him high risk. Maybe a few months in Crestview will wipe that arrogant look off his face. Vance banged her hand on the desk. Next case. Wait, Marcus said. His voice boomed, filling the room. The bailiff grabbed Marcus's arm, but Marcus planted his feet. He didn't move an inch. Vance froze. She looked back at him, eyes wide with shock that he dared to speak after the ruling. I have a motion, Marcus said calmly. You have a ticket to a cell, Vance spat. Get him out of here. I have a motion to represent myself, Marcus said. I am firing my counsel, effective immediately, and I demand a preliminary hearing right now. Under Illinois law, since you have set bail at a capital offense level, I am entitled to an immediate review of the evidence. The room went silent. This was complex legal procedure. Defendants like Marcus King weren't supposed to know the Illinois Code of Criminal Procedure. Vance narrowed her eyes. She looked at him like a bug she couldn't quite squish. You want to represent yourself? You want to play lawyer? I don't want to play, Judge. I want to clear my name. Vance sat back, a cruel glint in her eye. She checked her watch. 11:15 a.m. She had time to humiliate him before lunch. Fine, she said. Motion granted. Ms. O'Reilly, you are dismissed as lead counsel. Sitters stand by. Mr. King, you want a hearing? You get a hearing. Bring in Officer Miller. He's in the building. She smiled, a predator looking at prey. Let's see how smart you are, Mr. Consultant. But be warned, if you waste my time, I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin. And in my court, contempt carries a 6-month sentence. Consecutive. Marcus nodded. I understand. Perfect, he thought. Now I have you on the record. 10 minutes later, the courtroom was locked down. Judge Vance clearly wanted to make an example of Marcus. She wanted a spectacle. She assumed he would shout, scream, use slang, and look incompetent. It would justify her harsh bail and her bias. Officer Derek Miller swaggered to the witness stand. He was a thick-necked man with a buzz cut and a smirk he couldn't hide. He winked at the prosecutor as he sat down. Prosecutor Sterling breezed through the direct examination. Officer Miller, tell us what happened. Well, Miller drawled, leaning back. I pulled the defendant over for a busted taillight. Standard stuff. When I approached the vehicle, I smelled weed, strong odor. I asked him to step out. He got aggressive, started shouting about his rights. When I tried to pat him down, he swung at me, struck me in the shoulder. I had to subdue him. Did you find any contraband? Yes, sir. A baggie of meth in his front pocket. Thank you, officer. Sterling sat down, looking bored. Judge Vance looked at Marcus. Your witness, Mr. King. Make it quick. I have a lunch date. Marcus stood up. He didn't hunch anymore. His posture shifted. He stood with the straight-backed discipline of a Quantico graduate. He walked to the podium, not the defense table. Officer Miller, Marcus began, his voice polite. You stated you smelled marijuana. Was it burnt marijuana or raw marijuana? Miller blinked. Oh, burnt. Yeah, like he'd been smoking. Interesting, Marcus said, because the lab report on the evidence found in my car, which I have a copy of right here, shows 0 traces of marijuana, burnt or raw. No roaches, no residue, no ash. How do you explain that? Objection, Sterling shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, Vance said, waving a hand. Move on, King. Officers know what they smell. Marcus didn't flinch. Officer Miller, you said I struck you. Which hand? Your right hand, Miller said confidently. Right hook. And you were facing me? Yes. So if I swung with my right hand, it would hit the left side of your body. Your report says you were bruised on your right shoulder. How did I hit your right shoulder with my right hand while facing you? Did I have a 3-foot curved arm? Titters of laughter erupted from the gallery. Vance slammed her palm down. Silence! One more sound and I clear the court. She glared at Marcus. Watch your tone, defendant. I'm just asking about the physics, Your Honor, Marcus said. It seems physically impossible. The officer was in a struggle. Vance defended the witness from the bench. Things happen fast. Don't split hairs. Okay, Marcus continued. Let's talk about the dash cam. You said it malfunctioned. Yeah, tech issues. Happens all the time, Miller shrugged. Is it true, Officer Miller? Marcus asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. That the dashcam systems in 14th District cruisers are hardwired to a backup cloud server that activates automatically when the lights go on? Miller froze. I don't know about the tech stuff. I do, Marcus said. I have the technical specifications for your cruiser's model right here. He held up a piece of paper. It says the backup is tamper-proof. Objection, Sterling yelled. Hearsay, the defendant is testifying. Sustained, Vance yelled. Mr. King, put that paper away. You are not an expert witness. Actually, Your Honor, Marcus said, looking directly at Vance. I would like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a USB drive. What is that? Vance asked, suspicious. This, Marcus said, is the cloud backup footage of my arrest. My consulting firm was able to retrieve it from the server this morning. The courtroom went deadly silent. Miller looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at the judge. You hacked the police database, Vance screeched. "You are admitting to a felony in my courtroom?" "Public Record Access, Your Honor. Freedom of Information Act expedited request. Perfectly legal. Would you like to play it?" It shows Officer Miller smashing his own taillight with his baton before approaching my car. Vance's face turned a deep, blotchy red. She realized she was losing control of the narrative. If she played that video, the case was over. But more importantly, her kickback for sending him to Crestview would vanish. She needed him guilty. She needed him processed. "Motion denied," Vance said flatly. The entire room seemed to intake breath at once. Even the bailiff looked shocked. "Excuse me?" Marcus asked. "I said denied," Vance hissed. "I will not have unverified digital files from a criminal defendant introduced at a preliminary hearing. It could be deep-faked. It could be doctored. We will send it to the state lab for analysis. That will take, about 6 months. She smiled a terrible, victorious smile. "In the meantime, you will wait at Crestview." "You are suppressing exculpatory evidence," Marcus said. "This is a direct violation of Brady versus Maryland." "I am the law in this room, Mr. King," Vance shouted, standing up. "I decide what is evidence, and I decide who goes to jail. You think you're smart? You think you can come in here with your legal words and trick me? I see you. I know what you are." "And what am I, Judge?" Marcus asked softly. "You're a thug," she said. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. "And you're going to rot in a cage until I decide to let you out." She looked at the bailiff. "Take him into custody. Hearing over." Marcus didn't move toward the bailiff. He looked at his watch. 11:30 a.m. "Judge Vance," Marcus said, his voice changing. The street grit was gone. The submission was gone. In its place was a voice of absolute command. "Before you bang that gavel, I am giving you one chance to recuse yourself and enter that video into the record." "You are threatening me?" Vance laughed, incredulous. "Bailiff, gag him. Tack on a contempt charge." "Last chance, Elena," Marcus said. He used her first name. Vance froze. "I am not Marcus King," he said clearly. He reached for his waistband. The bailiff reached for his gun, panic erupting. "Don't shoot," Marcus commanded, holding his hands up slowly. He wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for the hem of his hoodie. He lifted the shirt. Clipped to his belt, right next to the FBI issue badge that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, was a gold shield. "I am Special Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI Public Corruption Task Force," he announced. The authority in his voice hit the room like a physical wave. "And as of this moment, this courtroom is a crime scene." The silence that followed Marcus Thorne's declaration lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then, courtroom 4B exploded. "He has a gun!" Judge Vance shrieked, scrambling back in her leather chair, knocking over her pitcher of water. "Bailiff! Shoot him! He's armed." The bailiff, a 20-year veteran named Higgins, looked at Marcus. He looked at the gold badge gleaming on Marcus's belt. He looked at the panicked judge. And then he slowly holstered his weapon and raised his hands. Higgins wasn't a corrupt man, just a tired one. He knew a federal badge when he saw one, and he knew that shooting an FBI special agent was a good way to end up on death row. "I'm standing down, Your Honor," Higgins said, his voice shaking. "Traitor!" Vance screamed. She pointed a trembling finger at Officer Miller. "Miller, do your job. Arrest him." Derek Miller, the bully who had planted the meth, didn't move toward Marcus. Instead, his eyes darted to the exit sign above the double doors at the back of the courtroom. Panic, primal and desperate, washed over his face. He bolted. "Runner!" Marcus shouted. But Miller didn't make it 3 steps. The back doors of the courtroom didn't open for Miller. Instead, they were kicked inward with a thunderous crack. "FBI! Nobody move! A swarm of agents in navy blue tactical vests poured into the room, rifles at the low ready. The students in the back row of the gallery, the ones Vance had ignored all morning, stood up in unison. They weren't students. They zipped up their windbreakers to reveal the yellow FBI letters on their backs. Miller skidded to a halt, trapped between Marcus and the tactical team. "Get on the ground, Miller!" Agent Sarah Jenkins, Marcus's partner, yelled from the gallery. She vaulted over the railing, her weapon drawn. "Face down, now!" Miller dropped like a sack of potatoes, sobbing. "I was just following orders. She told me to target him. It was her." "Shut up!" Vance yelled from the bench, her face pale as a sheet. "Don't you say a word." Marcus turned back to the judge. He walked up the steps of the witness stand, past the stunned court reporter, and stood directly below the judge's bench. The height difference was gone. The power dynamic had inverted. "Elena Vance," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise of Miller being handcuffed. "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, deprivation of rights under color of law, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" Vance gasped, clutching her pearls. "I am a judge of the circuit court. You cannot arrest me. I have immunity." "Judicial immunity doesn't cover criminal acts committed for personal profit," Marcus said coldly. "And when you send innocent people to a private prison in exchange for cash kickbacks, that's not sentencing. That's kidnapping for profit." He signaled to two agents. "Get her down from there." "Don't touch me." Vance swatted at the agents as they approached the bench. "This is a mistake. Do you know who I know? I have dinner with the governor. I will have your badges." "The governor signed the warrant, Elena," Marcus said. That stopped her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The agents moved in. They didn't treat her with the reverence she was used to. One agent grabbed her left arm, the other her right. They hauled her out of the high-backed leather chair. "My robes!" she cried as they pulled her down the stairs. "Let me take off my robes." "Leave them on," Marcus said. "I want the cameras outside to see exactly who you are." As they cuffed her hands behind her back, the metallic click echoed louder than any gavel she had ever struck. The courtroom erupted into cheers. The gallery, filled with the families of the victims she had wrongfully incarcerated, began to applaud. A mother in the front row stood up and screamed, "Thank you, Jesus!" Vance looked around, wild-eyed. She saw the people she had tormented. For the first time, she wasn't looking down at them. She was eye level, and she was in chains. "Read her rights," Marcus ordered Agent Jenkins. "And get that recording off my body wire. I want it uploaded to the cloud before we leave the building. I don't want any malfunctions happening to my evidence." The scene outside the courthouse was a media circus. The FBI had coordinated the raid perfectly. As Judge Vance was led out the front doors, flanked by Marcus and Agent Jenkins, 50 cameras flashed at once. She looked small. Without her bench, without her elevated platform, she was just a middle-aged woman in a black robe that was now bunching up around her ankles, revealing the expensive designer heels she had bought with dirty money. But Marcus wasn't done. The arrest of Vance was just the head of the snake. He had to burn the whole nest. He stepped up to a cluster of microphones that had been set up on the courthouse steps. Behind him, agents were leading out a chain of people. The court clerk who altered transcripts, 2 other dirty officers from the 14th District, and a man in a sharp Italian suit who was trying to cover his face with a briefcase. "Who is that?" a reporter shouted, pointing at the man in the suit. Marcus leaned into the microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Special Agent Marcus Thorne. For the last 8 months, the FBI has been investigating a massive corruption ring operating within the Cook County judicial system." He pointed to the man in the suit. "That man is Julian Crest, CEO of the Crestview Correctional Group, a private, for-profit prison system." The crowd gasped. "Mr. Crest and Judge Vance had a business arrangement," Marcus continued, his voice steady and projecting to the back of the crowd. "We have seized bank records in the Cayman Islands showing that for every defendant, Judge Vance sentenced to a Crestview facility. A consulting fee of $3,000 was deposited into a shell company owned by the judge. She wasn't dispensing justice. She was selling people. She was selling husbands, fathers, and sons to fill beds in a hotel made of bars." A roar of anger went up from the crowd. "We have identified over 400 cases," Marcus said, raising his voice over the noise. 400 Americans whose constitutional rights were violated. 400 people who were denied bail, denied counsel, and denied dignity, so that these two could buy vacation homes." He paused, looking directly into the nearest news camera. "To the families of those victims, the United States Department of Justice is initiating an immediate review of every single sentence handed down by Judge Vance. We are filing emergency motions this afternoon. Your loved ones are coming home." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was a sob, a collective, gut-wrenching release of tension from the community that had been held hostage by Vance's gavel for years. Marcus stepped back, but he caught Vance's eye as she was being shoved into the back of an SUV. She wasn't crying. She was glaring. She still thought she could win. She mouthed 2 words to him through the glass. "You're dead." Marcus just smiled and tapped his badge. "Agent Thorne," Sarah Jenkins whispered, coming up beside him. "We got the warrant for her house. You're going to want to see this." "What is it?" "We found the kids for cash ledger," Sarah said grimly. She kept a physical book, names, dates, and dollar amounts. She wrote down the profit margin next to the names of teenagers. Marcus felt a cold rage tighten his chest. "Get it to the U.S. attorney. And Sarah, make sure she goes to the downtown holding facility. General population." "General Pop?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous for a judge." "She's not a judge anymore," Marcus said, walking toward his car. "She's just another defendant who couldn't make bail." The journey from the courthouse to the FBI Chicago field office was less than 3 miles, but for Judge Elena Vance, it felt like a descent into a different dimension. She sat in the back of an unmarked black SUV, the tint on the windows so dark that the city she treated as her personal chessboard was reduced to muddy, grey blurs. She wasn't used to the back seat. She was used to town cars, drivers who opened doors, and the smell of expensive leather and vanilla air fresheners. This vehicle smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and the sweat of the criminals who had sat here before her. Her wrists ached. The handcuffs were standard issue, Smith & Wesson Model 100s, and they bit into the soft, manicured skin of her wrists with an unforgiving tightness. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain up her arms. "Can you loosen these?" she demanded, her voice rasping. She tried to sound like the Honorable Elena Vance, the terror of the 14th District, but it came out shrill and small. Agent Sarah Jenkins, driving the vehicle, didn't even look in the rearview mirror. "Sit tight, prisoner. We're almost there." Prisoner. The word hit Vance like a physical slap. For 15 years she had been, Your Honor. Judge. Ma'am. To be reduced to a noun that defined a lack of freedom was disorienting. She looked at Marcus Thorne sitting in the passenger seat. He was scrolling through his phone, looking completely at ease. He wasn't wearing the hoodie anymore. He had thrown on a navy blue FBI raid jacket over his t-shirt. He looked like a predator who had just eaten a very satisfying meal. "You know this won't stick," Vance hissed at the back of his head. "I know how the system works, Thorne. I am the system. You made a scene, congratulations. You embarrassed me. But by tomorrow morning, I'll be out on recognizance, and I will make it my life's mission to burn your career to the ground. I know judges on the federal bench. I know the mayor. Thorne didn't turn around. He just tapped his phone screen. You know, Elena, usually when people are in this car, they use the time to pray or cry. But you're still negotiating. It's fascinating. I'm not negotiating, she spat. I'm educating you. Save it for the interview room, Thorne said, his voice bored. The processing center at the federal building was a cold, fluorescent nightmare. It was designed to strip away humanity, layer by layer. For Elena Vance, the stripping was literal. She was placed in a holding cell with a female officer who looked at Vance with eyes devoid of recognition. There was no deference. No, take your time. Jewelry off, the officer ordered. Earrings, necklace, watch, rings. Vance hesitated, touching her pearl necklace. It was a gift from Julian Crest, bought with the kickback money from the sentencing of 3 teenagers in 2022. This is a vintage Mikimoto. It's worth $10,000. You better have a secure safe. Bin, the officer said, pointing to a grey plastic tray. Shoes. Socks. Vance stood barefoot on the cold linoleum. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since she was a child. The officer handed her a bundle of orange fabric. Standard issue jumpsuit. Put it on. I demand to stay in my civilian clothes until I see my attorney, Vance argued. I have rights. Not in intake, you don't, the officer said, snapping her gum. Put it on, or I call 2 male officers to help you put it on. Your choice, Your Honor. The sarcasm dripped like acid. Vance pulled on the jumpsuit. It was scratchy, smelling of industrial detergent. It was baggy in the wrong places and tight in others. It was the uniform of the people she despised. As she zipped it up, she felt the last vestiges of her power evaporating. She wasn't a judge anymore. She was just another orange blob in the system. Then came the mugshot. Turn to the left. Flash. Turn to the right. Flash. Face forward. Flash. The bright light blinded her, leaving purple spots in her vision. She knew that photo, her face pale, hair deflated, eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror, would be on the cover of the Chicago Tribune by the morning. Her legacy was gone. Interrogation Room 3 was a masterclass in psychological pressure. The walls were soundproofed foam, painted a dull grey. The air conditioner was cranked up just high enough to make you shiver, keeping your nerves on edge. There was a steel table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. Vance sat alone for 45 minutes. They had cuffed her left hand to a metal loop in the table. She couldn't pace. She could only sit and stare at her own reflection in the 2-way mirror. She looked old. The fluorescent lights were cruel to her complexion. She tried to fix her hair with her free hand, but without a mirror or brush, she just made it worse. Every minute that ticked by was a calculated insult. They were making her wait. Her. The woman who held people in contempt for being 30 seconds late. Finally, the heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Marcus Thorne walked in. He didn't have the file folder yet. He walked in with 2 cups of steaming coffee from a high-end shop down the street. The smell of roasted beans filled the sterile room. He sat down opposite her, placed 1 cup in front of himself, and the other he placed just out of her reach. Black. 2 sugars, Thorne said, taking a sip of his own. That's how you like it, right? I read your assistant's deposition. Poor girl spent half her day making sure your coffee was exactly 180 degrees. Vance stared at the cup. Her throat was parched. I want my lawyer. We're working on that, Thorne said calmly. But first, we have to go through the formalities. I plead the 5th, Vance said instantly. I know the drill, Agent. I'm not saying a word. Thorne smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had already triggered the trap. You don't have to say a word, Elena. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. It gives me more time to talk, and I have so much to tell you." He reached under the table and pulled out a thick file, slamming it onto the metal surface with a resounding thud. "Let's talk about the Cayman Islands," Thorne began. "Specifically an account under the name Libra Consulting. Cute name, Libra, the scales of justice. You really thought you were clever, didn't you?" Vance's face remained a mask of stone, but her left eye twitched. "We cracked the encryption on the shell company this morning," Thorne continued, opening the file. He slid a bank statement across the table. "You have $4 million sitting in that account, or I should say, you had $4 million. Vance looked down. The numbers were there. The dates matched the sentencings of high-profile juvenile cases. "Asset forfeiture is a beautiful thing," Thorne mused. "The Department of Justice froze it at 9 a.m. It's gone, Elena. Every penny. You did all this, ruined all those lives, for money you'll never get to spend." "This is circumstantial," Vance croaked, her voice dry. "You can't prove I knew about the deposits. My accountant handled that. I was a victim of fraud." "A victim?" Thorne laughed softly. He pulled a tablet out of the file. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let's watch a movie." He tapped the screen and turned the tablet toward her. The video was grainy, taken from a hidden camera inside a button on a shirt. It showed a dimly lit booth at Le Monde, the French restaurant. Vance was sitting there, drinking wine, laughing. Across from her was Julian Crest, the CEO of the prison company. Video Vance. "Julian, the occupancy rates are down in Unit B. I need to boost my numbers if I want that bonus before the holidays." Video Crest. "Just tighten the screws on the bail hearings, Elena. Send me the drug possession cases. I can bill the state $150 a day for those." Video Vance. "Done. I have a docket full of nobodies tomorrow. I'll fill those beds." Thorne paused the video on Vance's laughing face. The silence in the room was deafening. "That was recorded 3 weeks ago," Thorne said. "We flipped your waiter. He was wearing a wire. I'll fill those beds. That's a direct admission of conspiracy to commit kidnapping and fraud." Vance slumped in her chair. The air seemed to leave her lungs. "Julian, he set me up?" "Julian Crest is currently in the interrogation room next door, crying his eyes out and blaming you for everything," Thorne said. "He says you threatened to hold his other contracts in contempt if he didn't pay you. He's painting you as the mastermind, Elena. And right now, the first one to the finish line gets the plea deal. He's winning." Vance looked at the two-way mirror, terror dawning in her eyes. "I can give you names, other judges, the appellate court. I know people." "We don't want them right now," Thorne said coldly. "We want the butcher." He leaned forward, his face inches from hers. "Do you remember what you called me in that courtroom, before you knew I was FBI?" Vance swallowed hard. I was stressed." "You called me a thug," Thorne reminded her. "You looked at a man you didn't know, a man who had served his country for 10 years, a man with a law degree from Georgetown, and you decided I was trash because I was black and wearing a hoodie. You decided I belonged in a cage." He sat back. "Well, Elena, the irony is, you're the one who belongs in a cage. Because a thug takes what isn't his. You took freedom. You took futures. You took fathers away from their children." The door buzzed. "Ah," Thorne said, checking his watch. "Your legal counsel has arrived. You were very adamant about having the best representation." "Makepeace and Sullivan?" she asked, a flicker of hope returning. "Did they come?" "Not exactly," Thorne said. "See, when we seized your assets, we seized all your assets. Your house, your cars, your liquid cash. You are currently, legally speaking, destitute. And since this is a federal RICO case, The retainer for a private firm would be about $200,000 up front, which you don't have. Vance's eyes widened. No. Yes, Thorne smiled. We followed the standard procedure for indigent defendants. We assigned you a public defender. The door opened. Sheila O'Reilly walked in. The same public defender Vance had bullied for years. The woman Vance had dismissed as incompetent, lazy, and slow. Sheila looked different today. She wasn't rumpled. She stood tall, holding a notepad. Vance looked at Sheila as if she were seeing a ghost. You? No. I refuse. I demand a different lawyer. Sheila sat down in the chair next to Vance. She didn't look angry. She looked professionally detached. Ms. Vance, under federal rules, you don't get to shop around for court-appointed counsel unless you can prove a conflict of interest. And I don't have a conflict. I'm ready to zealously represent you, just like I tried to represent Marcus King this morning. You can't be serious, Vance whispered to Thorne. This is a joke. This is cruel. It's the system, Thorne said, standing up and gathering his files. The system you built. Wait, Vance lunged against the cuff. What happens now? Bail. I need a bail hearing. Thorne paused at the door. Oh, we already had the arraignment with the federal magistrate while you were being processed. Since you have significant overseas connections and facing a life sentence, you were deemed a maximum flight risk. Denied? Vance gasped. Denied, Thorne confirmed. You're being remanded to custody until trial. County? Vance asked, tears streaming down her face now. Please tell me it's county jail. I can handle county. I have a private cell at county. Thorne shook his head slowly. Federal marshals don't use county for high-risk RICO defendants. They contract out to private facilities for overflow. He let the words hang in the air. Vance's face went white, a sickly, ghostly white. No. Yes, Thorne said. Not Crestview, she begged. She began to pull at her handcuffs, the metal clanking frantically. You can't send me to Crestview. I sent half the population there. They'll kill me. They'll tear me apart. I don't control the housing assignments, Elena, Thorne said, his voice devoid of sympathy. I'm just a consultant. Please, she screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure desperation. I'll confess. I'll sign anything. Don't send me to Crestview. Put me in solitary. Please. Sheila. Thorne nodded to the public defender. She's all yours. Thorne stepped out of the room. As the heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off the fluorescent light, the last thing he heard was the sound of Judge Elena Vance, the butcher of Cook County, weeping on the floor, begging for mercy from the woman she had silenced only hours before. Outside the room, Agent Jenkins was waiting. She handed Thorne a wet wipe. You good? She asked. Thorne wiped the unseen grime of the interrogation off his hands. He looked at the closed door, then at the bustling office of agents working to free the innocent people Vance had locked away. Yeah, Thorne said, tossing the wipe in the trash. I'm good. Let's go process the release orders. We have 400 people waiting to go home. 6 months later, the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago was besieged by a snowstorm, but the real storm was inside Courtroom 21. The trial of United States versus Elena Vance had captivated the nation. It had everything the news cycle craved: corruption, money, racial profiling, and a stunning undercover operation by a handsome FBI agent. Elena Vance sat at the defense table. She looked like a ghost of her former self. The blonde helmet of hair was gone, replaced by grey roots and a messy bun. Her designer suits had been swapped for a simple, ill-fitting blouse provided by the public defender's office. She had lost 30 pounds. The arrogance that had defined her reign in the 14th district had evaporated, leaving behind a brittle, trembling shell. Sheila O'Reilly sat next to her, To everyone's surprise, Sheila had fought hard. She had filed motions to suppress the recordings, argued for a change of venue, and tried to paint Vance as a victim of Julian Crest's manipulation. But Sheila was fighting a forest fire with a water pistol. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Marcus Thorne sat in the front row of the gallery, right behind the prosecution. He wasn't testifying today. He had already done that. He had spent 3 days on the stand, meticulously walking the jury through the audio logs, the wire transfers, and the heartbreaking "kids for cash" ledger. Today was sentencing. The jury had deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all 32 counts: racketeering, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, deprivation of rights under color of law. Federal District Judge Robert Keller, a stern man with a reputation for absolute fairness, adjusted his glasses. He looked down at Vance, not with the disdain she used to show defendants, but with a profound disappointment. "Elena Vance," Judge Keller's voice boomed in the silent courtroom, "please stand." Vance stood up, her knees knocked together visibly. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Keller began, "I have seen murderers, cartel leaders, and terrorists, but I have rarely seen a criminal who frightened me as much as you do." Vance flinched. "A murderer kills a body," Keller continued, "but a corrupt judge kills the very idea of justice. You took the sacred trust of this office and you sold it. You turned your courtroom into a marketplace. You looked at young men and women, citizens you swore to protect, and you saw dollar signs." He picked up a piece of paper. "You sentenced Marcus Thorne to Crestview because you didn't like his face. You didn't know he was an agent. But for the 400 other people you sent there, they weren't agents. They were mechanics, students, fathers and mothers. They didn't have a wire. They just had their lives ruined." I am sorry," Vance whispered, the words barely audible. "I just want to go home." "The victims you sent away wanted to go home too," Keller said sharply. "But you denied them that right." He took a breath. "For the crimes committed, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. There is no parole in the federal system. You will serve 85% of your time before you are eligible for release. You will be 78 years old when you walk free." Vance let out a strangled cry. 25 years. It was a death sentence. "Furthermore," Keller added, "due to the overcrowding of federal facilities in this district and your specific request to be kept near your family in Illinois, the Bureau of Prisons has assigned your placement." Vance looked up, hope warring with terror. "You will be remanded to the custody of the Crestview Correctional Facility," Keller said. The scream that tore from Elena Vance's throat was primal. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul shattering. "No, no, you can't!" she shrieked, grabbing Sheila O'Reilly's arm. "They're there! The people I sentenced! They're all there! They'll kill me! You have to stop this!" "Order!" Judge Keller banged his gavel. "Marshals, take custody of the defendant." 2 U.S. Marshals moved in. They didn't handle her gently. They cuffed her hands behind her back, just as she had done to thousands of others. As they dragged her toward the side door, the prisoner's door, she locked eyes with Marcus Thorne. She didn't glare this time. She begged. "Thorne," she screamed, "help me, please. You're one of the good guys. You can't let them do this." Marcus stood up slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked her in the eye, his expression unreadable. "I don't determine housing assignments, Elena," he said softly, repeating the line one last time. "I'm just a witness." The door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. 3 days later, the transport bus rattled through the gates of the Crestview Correctional Facility. It was a bleak, grey fortress of concrete and razor wire, rising out of the flat Illinois cornfields like a tombstone. Elena Vance sat in the back of the bus, shackled to the floor. She was wearing the orange jumpsuit. She was stripped of her makeup, her jewelry, her title, and her dignity. The bus hissed to a halt in the intake yard. "Get up, Vance!" a guard barked. She stumbled off the bus, blinking in the harsh sunlight. The yard was fenced in, surrounded by 3-story cell blocks. It was wreck hour. The yard was full. Hundreds of women in orange jumpsuits stopped what they were doing. The basketball game stopped. The weightlifting stopped. The conversations died. A silence fell over the yard, a heavy, predatory silence. They recognized her, even without the robes, without the blonde hair. They knew that face. It was the face that had looked down on them from the high bench, the face that had ignored their pleas, the face that had laughed when they cried about their children. "Yo," a voice called out from the weight bench. It was a tall woman with a teardrop tattoo. Vance remembered her. State Vers Rodriguez, 2019. Possession of a stolen credit card. Vance had given her 5 years maximum because she didn't like her tone. "Is that the butcher?" Rodriguez asked, her voice carrying across the yard. Vance began to shake. She looked for the guards, but they were standing back near the gate, seemingly busy with paperwork. In Crestview, the prison she helped fill for profit, the guards were understaffed and underpaid. Just the way Julian Crest had designed it. Another woman stepped forward, State v. Lewis, a grandmother Vance had sentenced for fraud. "Well, well," Lewis said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Welcome to the hotel, Your Honor." The circle began to close in. Vance backed up until she hit the chain-link fence. There was nowhere to go. The karma she had accrued for 15 years had finally arrived, and it was demanding payment. "Guard!" Vance screamed. "Help!" The guard at the gate looked up slowly, checked his watch, and turned his back. As the sea of orange jumpsuits engulfed her, Elena Vance realized too late that the gavel didn't make her a god. It just made her a target. Back in Chicago, Marcus Thorne sat on a park bench, watching a group of kids play basketball. One of them was the 19-year-old kid from the holding cell, the one who had warned him about Vance. The kid had been released 3 days ago, his record expunged. He was laughing, trying to dribble past his little brother. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah Jenkins. Subject: case update, all 412. Wrongful convictions vacated. The class action lawsuit against Crestview just settled for $50 million. The victims are getting paid. Marcus smiled. He put the phone away. He watched the kid make a layup, the ball swishing through the net with a perfect, clean sound. It was a better sound than a gavel. Judge Elena Vance believed she was the law. She believed that a robe and a wooden hammer gave her the right to treat human beings like inventory in a warehouse. She ruined lives for profit, mocking the very people she was sworn to serve. But justice has a funny way of balancing the scales. By targeting Marcus Thorne, a man she saw as nothing more than a statistic, she invited the wolf into her own house. In the end, Vance didn't just lose her job. She lost her freedom to the very machine she helped build. She spent the rest of her life in a cage of her own making, surrounded by the ghosts of her corruption. It's a stark reminder. No one is above the law. Not even the ones who swing the gavel. Wow, that is a terrifying look at what happens when power goes unchecked. It's scary to think that people like Judge Vance actually exist, profiting off the suffering of others. But seeing Marcus Thorne take her down from the inside, that is the definition of satisfying justice. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes legal revenge and the ultimate karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. What do you think? Did Judge Vance deserve to go to the same prison she sent her victims to, or was that too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Next week, we're covering a corrupt CEO who tried to frame his janitor, only to find out the janitor was the owner of the company. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.